So I'm joined here by Megan Green, who's Director of European Economics at Rubini Global Economics. Megan, we've just heard Germany say that Ireland is a special case. Now, as you probably know, having been here for a while, we're very uncomfortable with praise as people. What does that mean, that we're special? Like, is that special as in elite special forces, or special as in we have special economic needs?
Unfortunately, I think it's more along the lines of the latter.
Okay.
In saying that Ireland has special needs because it is, the only country that really started off purely as a banking crisis, which then spread onto the state, whereas in most of the other countries, the crisis either started in the public sector or was a bit of both. Ireland stands apart a little bit in that it really was a banking sector, but I think most of all, Merkel's just trying to buy time until after her election.
Okay, but this idea of like the banking thing, because they're praising us now. That makes me think either we're very good little boys, or else we're being shafted and we don't realise it yet. We've been blinded by the praise. Because it seems like Germany thinks they're giving us all this money, but they're actually just lending us money to give straight back to all their investors. It's kind of like what Tony Soprano does with that sports company he takes over, where he lends the money, but the money's going right back to him, and then he's just bankrupting the company, and then he walks away with all the cash. It feels like Germany might be doing that to Ireland. Is that totally unfair, or is that?
No, there's a degree of truth in that. Certainly, I mean, these are loans.
We're not screwed.
Yeah, well, not that screwed, perhaps, but these are loans, and Germany expects to be repaid. Now, will Germany be repaid? Not by all the countries. I actually don't think Ireland will be repaying all of its debts either, in which case then Germany actually gets shafted. But in the meantime, the idea is that Ireland's actually borrowing at rates that it's going to have to add on to its repayments.
So the idea is that we get shafted, but actually, ultimately, we're going to hopefully shaft them. Is that sort of what you're saying?
To some degree. Choreography is everything, so a lot depends on how exactly it happens. There are different ways to shaft Germany, I guess. And I think that Ireland needs to be really careful about how it relates to its EU partners, given that Ireland's main driver for growth is, its position as a springboard for access for multinational companies into the rest of the EU market.
So is there a book here on 50 Shades of Shafting Germany? Megan Green, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Cheers. We're joined to discuss this possible, rather contentious point by Professor Bill Black, Associate Professor of Economics and Law at University of Missouri, also a white-collar criminologist, what a great phrase that is, serial whistleblower and former financial regulator, and also by Peter Antonioni, Senior Teaching Fellow, Department of Management, Sites and Information, University College London, and the speaker at this conference on a piece called The Economics of the Wire. Peter, if I can start with you, would it be fair to say that what essentially happened in Ireland is that Anglo-Irish Bank were essentially dumping toxic debt in boarded-up row houses? And waiting eventually for people like Bill to come along and find out that actually that's not cool and dig them all up, and we're all dealing with the process afterwards.
That's pretty fair. I mean, don't know what the kind of Cadillac and nail guns they were using to board up the houses with, but other than that, it's fair.
Well, they were houses, and they were in fact ghost estates.
They were like ghost estates, yeah. Actually, Ireland's all right for its ghost estates. I mean, there's a place in Europe, Valencia, that's got a zombie airport. So
Wow, a zombie airport. That's just in case you're wondering, viewers. That is not an airport populated by zombies. No. That is not where zombie apocalypses are launched from. Strategically around the airport.
And it's not a load of hipsters doing a really hilarious zombie flash mob in an airport either. Right.
No, it's like they've got one perfectly decent airport, and when credit was cheap and the money just seemed to keep flowing, they built another one, but it's never opened.
Okay.
I don't think even the runway has been filled in on it.
And Michael O'Leary hasn't started flying in planes there with no bus service. He hasn't.
No, they've got perfectly enough capacity at the old one.
All the zombie passengers as well, who if you fly Ryanair, you'll be familiar with. Okay, that's good to know. And in terms of, Bill, you're sort of the go-to guy on this, the whole banking crisis. You wrote a book called "The Best Way to Rob a Bank Is to Own One." Is that essentially what happened in Anglo? I mean, is that what they did? Is it?
No, it's absolutely what happened at Anglo, and it's the same recipe that we've known for 25 years. And it's got 4 ingredients. 1, you grow like crazy. 2, by making really crappy loans at a premium yield. That just means a high interest rate. 3, with extreme leverage. That just means a whole lot of debt compared to your capital. And 4, with next to no reserves against the inevitable catastrophic losses. You do those 4 things. Doesn't require any skill. It's not a risk. It is a sure thing. That's the Nobel Prize winner's phrase. You will report.
Sounds a hell of a lot like a pyramid scheme, by the way.
A pyramid often ends up with a pyramid which lasts for thousands of years. If these survived the flood, since they were often built in floodplains for 2 years, you're very lucky.
Wow. But so that's, you're saying a formula of literally just grow really fast, make really rubbish loans, and give yourself performance bonuses based on, I've made this many loans, I'm doing brilliantly. And then when it all crashes, the company is bankrupt, but you individually, not you obviously, but the individual walks off with a shed load of cash.
And in fact, that's the name of the Nobel Prize winner's article, Looting the Economic Underworld of Bankruptcy for Profit. So the looter, the CEO, can walk away wealthy, and everything else is left bankrupt.
I've got to ask you this, right? Because I'm a little bit concerned, because you've been saying this since like 1980. You've been working in this field since 1984, and going around saying, look, this is the formula. This is what people have done again and again and again. Do you think that maybe some of them were paying attention and around 2006 went, hey, you know what? This guy Bill is great. This is a sure thing. And one of the Nobel Prize winners, he really seems to know his stuff. If we just follow this formula, we can bankrupt the entire economy and make loads of money.
It's like those interviews with former criminals where they say how to break into a house.
And everyone's watching, taking down. Do you think they were taking down notes? I mean, is that...
Well, when I teach it, I do say it right at the beginning of the class. If any of you use this to commit the fraud, I volunteer to the prosecutors to be a free expert witness against you.
Okay.
And in every case I've been an expert witness, there's been a successful prosecution. So if you want to go ahead, you know, make my day type of thing.
So you're keeping yourself in business, basically.
But the crooks know this.
Right. Yes.
And the terrible thing is, how hard is it to make a bad loan? Right? You don't have to get an MBA in making bad loans. That's really easy. You got it in one. You create the incentive structure. You say, we give you a bigger bonus if you make more loans, and we don't care whether they're good loans or bad loans. Gee. Oh, I know, I should make lots of loans.
So what's scary, though, is, as I say, you've been working in this field since the 80s. This all happened with the savings and loan. You know, came out and said, this is what's gone wrong, this is what's happened. And it all happened exactly the same way. It's like, how did people not get this? Or is it just that we don't, as a public, don't really pay attention, and corporations are just constantly looking for ways to make loads of profit?
So there was a big, deliberate competition in laxity, a regulatory race to the bottom.
Okay.
And the city of London won the race.
Whoop-de-doo.
You're right. Now, the only way to win a race like that is to refuse to engage in it. But they were very proud, and so they did Reg Light, Exam Light, and such. And Ireland was very proud, and Iceland had outright cheerleaders for regulators. So when you have regulators chosen like that, and if you're a good regulator, you're going to stay.
Yeah.
And when it's a farce like that, of course not. So over time, these regulatory agencies become the land of the invertebrates.
Was it our hero Clinton who kind of dismantled some of the stuff that you used in the decade previously to convict bankers? Were some of those regulations dismantled during Clinton's reign?
Right as he came in. So in the U.S. context, among the first things that they do are they say, we're not going to prosecute the big bank fraud cases, and they instruct us as regulators that we are to refer to the industry and think of the industry as, quote, our client.
Wow. So if I just go back to bring Peter in, sorry, just 'cause this is a system just that fails and keeps failing, which is exactly what happens in The Wire in a way. We were trying to work out earlier, is Ireland Bodie? I mean, with the Barks, because you're wearing a Celtic Tiger T-shirt, which seems just provocative. With the Celtic Tiger, we had the Barksdale Empire.
Irony, irony.
Okay, and now we're in the Marlowe era, and we're Bodie. We tried to make it work in the last, and now we're trying to make it work in this, and we're kind of getting shafted either way. We try to do a good thing, we get shot. I mean, who are we in this situation, and how do you explain this?
Probably Cuddy just before his happy ending. Ireland's got out of prison, being tracked back in the game, trying to be an honest man about the whole thing, but all the incentives are to get back in there, and you know, at some point you've got to say, game enemy no more. Yeah,
so we're not going to be in the game anymore. Yeah, or are we just Dougal, really? Father Dougal, but possibly, I don't know.
I don't recall him on the streets of Baltimore.
One of the things you were talking about in your show, The Economics of the Wire, is that, you know, The Wire is an easy example to examine as a system that functions because it actually is not interfered with in the way. We talk about regulation. Bad regulation and good regulation are both interferences. Whereas you've almost got the perfect economic system in something like the wire.
Oh, in the black markets, in the drugs markets, yeah. I mean, it's not so much that they function in the way that you kind of think, well, this is a really good market, it functions perfectly. It's more in the fact that there's absolutely no interference in it, but it behaves like a normal market. And actually, you've got plenty of transactions that have to take place on trust, because obviously you can't have a contract just any more than you can take notes on a criminal conspiracy if
you were to think of one thing you could learn, that we could learn as a country from the wire, what would be a good lesson?
Basically,
sell drugs, you make a load of money. Start selling crack now.
Basically, you can't be a good man in a bad system. And at the moment in the European system, Ireland is trying to be good in a bad system. Okay. Ireland's masochistic about its debt. It's not as...
Bill, this leads right into your...
No, so this leads right into one of the really important things about the crisis and the wire and the markets it's describing there. So the big theory on why we didn't have to have regulation was that financial markets are self-regulating, and therefore fraud's impossible.
Yes,
which is absurd. You actually create massive bubbles through fraud. But in the wire, drug sales are a self-regulating market. So if the police ever have any effectiveness in cutting down on the supply, the price goes up, the profit goes up, more people enter, and we're back to equilibrium. It's the perfect economic market.
They get rid of an entire empire, and then somebody else just moves in. Moves in.
It may be the only efficient market in the world.
Well, and the irony is people who are against regulation and really want to, and government intervention, saying governments ruin markets. Yes, they do. They ruin the drugs market.
They love Somalia.
Well, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Actually, but come back on Colin's point about what's the one lesson of all, because you've really done your time on this. What is the thing we need to put in place to stop these crises from continually happening, or is it just eternal vigilance? What's the...
Well, first, it is eternal vigilance. This isn't any war metaphor. You can't win once and then go home, because fraudsters will always have this incentive. So there are basically two things. You've got to have regulators with at least not terrible incentives, who are picked because they believe in enforcing the law. And second, you got to get rid of the things that are making really perverse incentives, what in criminology we call a criminogenic environment, an environment that incentives are so screwed up they produce epidemics of fraud. And the biggest thing there is executive compensation.
Right.
So it is too big, and it is
Bonuses.
tied to short-term reported income, which is the easiest thing to scam through accounting fraud. If you went to actual long-term, and I mean like 10 years performance before you could get really wealthy and such, and had clawback provisions even then, you would dramatically reduce.
So it's giving the incentives and making those right. Before we finish up, I want to ask you both quickly about the US elections coming up, and there's a lovely scene actually in The Wire where someone explains to Carcetti that basically being the mayor is just coming in every day and eating different people's shit. Essentially, that's what it is. I mean, is Obama eating different? Is Mitt Romney, if Mitt Romney gets elected, he's eating the same shit? I mean, would a Mitt Romney America look? How would it look economically different to an Obama America in your view?
That's actually a really good question. I mean,
surprisingly, we think we get one in the end. You know,
I mean, it's. I think the point is that a Romney America for me looks like it would actually create more shit than an Obama premiership. But the thing is that the power of the president, you can actually, sum it up as the power to persuade. He's got to take Congress with him. If you're running against a split Congress, then you can get the Republicans doing all of the crazy things that they do to prevent a president from becoming effective. And you have to work within a system, and that's it's not really the point about who's in charge. It's the point is the system capable of learning and changing.
And weirdly, one of the arguments made for Romney has been, well, the Republicans will just throw their toys out of the pram if Obama gets elected. So at least Romney will be working with reasonable people. But that's kind of a my way or we go home kind of.
It's kind of like trying to persuade people that voting for the lesser evil is somehow a bad thing.
Cool. And
because
Bill,
a greater evil is by
Bill, how do you think a Romney America would look different to an Obama America?
Well, on the prosecution side, we've been talking about fraud. It doesn't look different at all. So there are 0 prosecutions of the Wall Street elite frauds that drove the U.S. crisis. 0. Contrast to the savings and loan debacle, which was 1/70th the size and had roughly 1/70th as much fraud, where we had over 1,000 successful felony convictions of elites, and where we had the absurdity that our top prosecutor in the nation, Lanny Brewer, has said we can't prosecute these corporations because there were lawyers on both sides of the deal. So I'm a recovering litigator. I'm going back into law now that I know I can give immunity to any criminal violation in the world. I could sell my opinion for a couple $1,000,000 and such, and then I could move to Baltimore and such. So that side, not much. In the economic regulation side, Romney has said he wants to repeal the entire Dodd-Frank bill, the re-regulation of the industry, and his chief economic advisor says we got to win the competition in laxity against the City of London. So he is actually capable of being worse than Obama on the financial side, which takes some deal of effort.
Wow. Well, on that optimistic note, thank you both very much, and that's great. Our thanks this week to Professor Megan Green, Professor Bill Black, and Peter Antonioni. Also to the good people of Dublin. This is What a State. See you next week.
Al-Qaeda, it's time you thought truly global. It's time to invest in the West. Here's why you should invest in us. You like to take down billions one by one. It's time to think bigger. We've destroyed an entire property market. You see, we understand your business needs. Got a history of terrorism? You could have a political future. We nearly made this one president. Like to condemn the Catholic Church? Not as much as we do. Your marketing campaigns are world renowned for their low quality and poor production. Our national broadcast will pay you hundreds of thousands for low quality programming. They'll show anything. We all like the idea of the 72 versions, lads. But you don't need to be blowing yourself up to get the right over here. The only bombs you'll need are Jaeger. So Al-Qaeda, invest in Ireland. We'll say enough.
I remember when we sat outside, you just ignore it.
Welcome to What a State. My name is Abie Philbin Bowman. You probably realise that financially the country is fairly screwed at the moment. I mean, we got these microphones from the Britney Spears 2002 tour on eBay. We haven't been using our resources effectively as a country. I mean, if we'd really been thinking, our IMF negotiation team would have been led by Jedward. Half an hour with Jedward, the IMF would give us whatever we wanted. Half an hour with Jedward, Vincent Brown, and Joan Burton, we would own Germany. And no disrespect to Vincent Brown, I mean, he's amazing. He's Jeremy Paxman on asthma. And I'm not trying to pick on Joan Burton either. I quite like her. I mean, she's one of the better Labour politicians. Labour obviously doing much better since they've got a leader whose name doesn't sound like an Australian sex toy. All right, Sheila, I've got a Dick Spring and a pet rabbit. But no, I mean, Joan Burton, she's a good politician. There aren't enough women in Irish politics. I'd like to see more. I think she's one of the good people. I just hope she never gets a job answering phones for the Samaritans. But we haven't handled the situation well. If we'd really been thinking, as I say, we could have used Jedward. I'm sure some of you find Jedward annoying. I actually think they send a very positive message to young children with disabilities. The message that I get from Jedward is, channel your autism. Make it work for you. I mean, why be autistic when you can be autastic? So we're screwed as a country financially. But look, I don't know about you. I grew up hearing about 800 years of British oppression. But that ended in the 1920s, at least on this part of the island. And then the Irish people collectively turned to the Catholic Church and went, your turn. And for 90 years, the Catholic Church ran our country and told us what to do. And now we're finally standing up to the Church. And the IMF have arrived, and now they're telling us how to run our country. And to paraphrase Oscar Wilde, to be colonised once may be considered unfortunate. To be colonised twice looks like carelessness.